Stephen Hollis. Hello, Stephen. An Eastern European co-worker once stated an observation, saying, quote, "I find it strange you let your kids drive vehicles," unquote. I believe referring to 16-year-old teens as being able to have driver licenses. He was also amazed at the choices we had when buying an automobile. Has Natasha ever mentioned anything like this, and what was her cultural shock revelation? Well, it wasn't just Natasha who had cultural shock in this happy meeting. I had a fair amount of it too. So let me tell you about my cultural shock, and then I'll tell you about hers, at least as it appears to me. I was not one of these people who thought that in 2016 when we met that Russia was essentially, the Russia of the Soviet times where, that old, was it a Wendy's ad where these, barrel-shaped babushkas come out in the same piece of burlap and everybody goes, "Oh, very nice, very nice." I knew that Moscow was not what Moscow was in the 70s during last years of communism. But I had no idea that Moscow was the city that it is today in terms of it's spotlessly clean. It's completely lit up. It's beautifully maintained. It's simply astonishing. Pretty much brand new. Natasha sees a building that's 30, 40 years old, and she says, "This reminds me of the 90s in the Soviet Union when everything was old." Natasha was shocked by the fact that there were so many electrical cables. Walk down the street in Los Angeles, and you see these wooden telephone poles, and hanging from the wooden telephone poles are these wires, and she could never get over it. It was like, what the hell is this? She didn't say, "What the hell is this?" She says, this looks like the 18th century. I guess I never really thought about it before. You don't have those? No, our wires are all underground, and when they have to go above ground, they're on concrete pillars. And time and time again. So it was shocking to me to see how advanced Moscow was in terms of its overall quality of living, in terms of things like public services and just general cleanliness, quality of roads, quality of mass transit, all that stuff. This is what happens when you take the entire wealth of a country and basically spend it in order to polish up a city. Not to sound defensive about it, it causes me constant shame, especially in Los Angeles. I'll get to that in a second. But if I was the president of the United States with dictatorial powers and I wanted to make New York sparkle, and I had $1 trillion to do it with, I could do that too. But nevertheless, that is a shock to me, was how modern and how sophisticated and how elegant and so on. The two things I think three things that struck my wife, I think, the most, none of them were things like, wow, look at the cars. They've got all kinds of cars in Moscow. They've got very, very nice Mercedes and BMWs. So it wasn't anything technological or shiny like that. In many ways, it's a shinier city than certainly it's a shinier city than mine. But there are a couple things that really did surprise her. Some of them are good and some of them are bad. The embarrassing ones, where she could not believe how poor the conditions of the airports and the roads were. She spent 3 hours in customs when we met in New York City at JFK. At JFK, I remember being a boy going to fly in and out of JFK in 1963-64. It was the first modern airport. The Pan Am terminal at John F. Kennedy International is ancient and decaying now, and there's millions of buildings like it. But at the time, the Pan Am terminal in whenever it was built, 63, 64, early 60s at JFK, was the first of these modern airport buildings. It's shaped like kind of a top of a potato, and it's all wide open areas. It was revolutionary. I remember walking in there, it was like, oh my God, that was 1963. I went to Thailand in 2012. And the airport looked like it was built by Vulcans 300 years in the future and sent back in time. And I was ashamed of LAX and ashamed of John F. Kennedy. Then in the case of Thailand, I got about 10 minutes outside of the airport. And then all of a sudden I realized, okay, well, there's a guy in a rice paddy with a cloth around his waist whipping a buffalo. And that's their house, that shack made out of corrugated tin and plastic bags. So I felt a little better after that. So the overall quality of that is low. There's a happy story here, happier kind of a tale to this story. So she was shocked at how run down JFK was. New York City impressed her enormously because New York City, despite the fact that it's actually a very filthy city, is an incredible place. It's an amazing place. It's an absolutely magical place to spend 3 or 4 days. And any longer than that, you're going to lose your mind. But New York City is not just a sparks coming. Best thing I ever heard about New York City, by the way, was by Sam Shepard, the playwright who I like very much. Good actor, too. He died not too long ago. He was played the general in Black Hawk Down, and he played Chuck Yeager in The Right Stuff. But Sam Shepard was a playwright before he was an actor, and 30 years ago, something like that, so 40 years ago. Sam Shepard said the first time he was ever in New York City, he'd come from wherever he was in Texas or whatever. He said he was walking down the streets of New York City. He'd just taken some mescaline. He had on his cowboy hat and his cowboy boots, and he said when he looked down, he could see sparks flying off of his heels every time his feet touched the pavement. And I thought, man, that is New York. When New York is jumping in the fall, when it's nice, not cold, but crisp, that town has an electricity that no place else has, that I've been to. So she liked New York, but when she got off the plane in Los Angeles, she simply couldn't believe it. She was just dumbstruck. She couldn't speak. It was like she didn't want to keep talking about it, but all she could see was just the trash everywhere. And the freeways here are third world freeways. And this is Los Angeles. It's the town that everybody knows around the world. This is where all of the TV shows and all the movies are made. This is where the glamour capital of the world is. And it's appalling. And to come to Los Angeles and expect to see this magical place and see nothing but just trash everywhere on the side of all the freeways and the exit ramps just lined with trash. And then we go to this great place downtown, and you have to go through entire cities of homeless people. There's 60 tents underneath one overpass, and it looks like, and she says to me, this is worse than Cairo. This is worse than Istanbul. And it's embarrassing. And it really isn't. It's embarrassing and it's shameful. Now, after we'd been in Los Angeles for a couple months, she came with me because she goes to pretty much all the events I do, and it makes my life so much different, so much better. But somewhere 2 or 3 months after she arrived permanently, I had a speaking event in Orange County, and we started driving south, and then all of a sudden the road suddenly got smooth, and everything was landscaped, and all the buildings were new, and she looked around astonished, and she just said, what happened? What happened? We're in Orange County now. That place was governed by Democrats. This place is governed by Republicans. The roads are spotless and they're beautifully, perfectly maintained, and all of the buildings are new, and there's no trash anywhere because it's run by Republicans. And I'm happy to say that everywhere we've been since then, I think without exception, was far, 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 far cleaner than Los Angeles. We've been to Illinois, Minnesota, Florida. We've been to Idaho, driven a bit through Washington State, Nevada, Arizona. That's just so far, and I'm probably missing a couple. And all of them are nicer than Los Angeles. So that was took a bit of the edge off of it, made it at least realize how localized it is. But yeah, if you're not prepared for it, it's quite a shock. So there was that. The part I'm happy to report about is, and this is the thing I'm actually proudest about in a weird sort of way. I don't have to, I don't, the 90s in Russia were such a traumatic time that communism had fallen and the economy collapsed, and there was nothing but, it was a kleptocracy, just nothing but gangs taking over the communists had, in many cases the same person. And it was brutal. The 90s were brutal in Russia, brutal. And so anytime she sees something older or, when I say old, I don't mean decrepit, I mean just older. She has this very strong reaction to it, and I don't have that reaction. So, and by the way, I know what the flags on the moon look like, so I'm not too insecure about the whole technology thing and so on. But the trash bothered me. because I'd never seen it before, really. The thing that I'm proudest of, we noticed on the first night back in Los Angeles. I used to live right across the street from Whole Foods, believe it or not, and would walk across the street there. And we went grocery shopping, and again, this is a great thing about being married to a foreigner, is you see your country in completely different eyes. We went to Whole Foods, and we got a bunch of stuff. And we're checking out, and it's a typical, absolutely normal experience that all of us have had. You show up in the line's moving pretty fast, and maybe one person in front of you or something. And the cashier gets to you and say, "Hey, how are you? Did you find everything you need?" "Yeah, I did. Thanks. How are you?" "Good. I'm good. How are you?" "I'm fine." "Hey, that's a nice shirt you're wearing there." "Thank you very much. How's it going with you?" Just kind of thing. And they're bagging your groceries. And Natasha's staring at this with her mouth open. Couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. And I didn't realize it until after we were out of there. As we were leaving, she's just knocked on the head. So what's up? What's the matter? I can't believe what I just saw. What? I really just didn't know what it was. Everybody's so polite. A lot of Europeans come here and think that's fake, by the way. I remember when even 35, 40 years ago when I was in college, there was a group visiting from, where were they from? Someplace. Might have been the Netherlands. Netherlands or Belgium, I think. Anyway, there was a bunch of theatrical students came to visit our school for a while. They were touring the United States, and we kind of took care of them. We took them to Oaks Mall. And they were convinced that everybody saying, "Hey, how are you?" Good. They thought it was just 100% a script designed to get their money. They could not understand that people were actually this friendly. They thought they were suspicious of it. Natasha says Russians would be suspicious of it. Nobody's friendly. Nobody smiles. Nobody helps anybody out. And she said something that was just so touching to me, and she said, "I always wanted to live in a place where people were friendly. I always wanted to be nice to people. I try to be nice to people. But where I come from, if you're nice to people, you're either an idiot or you're running a con." And as far as bagging the groceries go, they don't. They just push it. You get it in a bag, not their problem. So virtually all the time we go out, the quality of service, just the everyday, simple, fundamental experience of going shopping and things like that still amazes her. It amazes her that people are friendly. It amazes her that people are talking to each other, joking in line. It amazes her that she'll walk into a restaurant or a supermarket and somebody she'd never seen before says, "That's a lovely dress you're wearing." She's just gobsmacked by it. And I just beaming with pride. But I think the thing that she was probably most impressed by, I'm not speaking for her, I'm going to find out the facts in probably in half an hour. But I think the thing that was most impressive to her, and you'll all love this because I certainly did. And by the way, somebody said, who is it? Friday 63, Natasha, if you think it's friendly here or in Idaho, wait till you go to the South. It's just, there are elements of the South that are just shockingly friendly, almost unbelievable. Anyway, the thing I think that probably had the most visceral impact on her was taking her shooting. When we went out, she shot a 9mm, and it was never fired a weapon at all before. I was on a private range, and it wasn't really exactly a fun experience because it was in a very small underground room, very small. So there's a lot of not just sound in there, there's a pretty strong concussion in there. But we took her to an outdoor range, and I rented a .22 pistol, and she took to that like I've never seen anybody take to it. She loved it so much that I bought her a .22 pistol. I bought her a Beretta. And she is such an astonishingly good shot that within 3 weeks she was out shooting the pistol. She was better than the pistol was. She was the pistol sights were not as good as her aim was. So I got her a Buckmark 22 target pistol, which she is unbelievably good at. Unbelievably good shot. Much better than me. And every time I say that, she said, "Oh, no, you're a better shot." I'm not, though. I'm not. And I don't have to be. I'm a good enough shot. I'm a decent shot. She's astonishing. She's absolutely astonishing. And it's because she's been a photographer for 25, 30 years, and she shoots with a depth of field that's a couple of, half an inch deep. She's using lenses wide open, and her focal plane is so narrow that she's got to hold this thing rock solid to get enough of an exposure, to get enough light through there to get this thing the way she wanted. Maybe it's not wide open, maybe it's fully closed. I don't remember. But in any event, narrow depth of field, so she has to hold these things rock steady and close one eye, and she's just naturally suited for it. But it's not just the fact that she had a lot of fun shooting. And by the way, for the first, I want to say 4 or 5 months, we were going to the range every weekend. Natasha was shooting probably between 600 and 1,000 rounds a week. And just deadly. We were just up at Oak Tree this last weekend to get my formerly illegal AR-15, now fully illegal, which makes me very, very happy. I don't have to get that ridiculous gun stock. And by the way, that featureless AR-15 thing, the thing that got rid of the pistol grip, was everywhere. And then along came this little magic device that I talk about in my right angle if you haven't seen it yet. And you don't even see those things anymore, those horrible, ugly things that are attached by 3 screws and you could be removed in probably 20 seconds. So anyway, it wasn't just the fact that shooting was fun. I could see that the fact that she was not only allowed, but at least in the circles that I travel in, strongly encouraged to be able to do this, to go out and do it, have fun, that there were social clubs, women's shooting clubs, all of it. I think when she realized, she actually held that thing in her hand, and she realized, I think on some level, that this is the difference between free people and slaves. That this is the difference. And that, I don't have to tell you this, all of our rights are protected by that right. And I think Natasha finally understood America as a result of a very kind of innocuous sort of throwaway line I had. But it was a very, very powerful moment for both of us. And I mentioned this in the right angle, I think, as well. So in Moscow, as in many other places in the world, Britain certainly now, and virtually everywhere else. In Moscow, in this beautifully run, clean city, when you go to your apartment, the door is made out of steel, and there's probably 4 or 5 beefy deadbolts, And that's because people will break down your door and they'll beat you up or knife you and take your stuff. And when we got to my apartment, when we first moved here, she saw this one tiny little deadbolt, and she was just shocked, But then when we moved to the house that we're renting, it's got this decorative glasswork around the door. And we were coming home, and it's got a tiny little, almost like a dollhouse deadbolt. And a regular lock on the door. And we were coming in one night, and she looked at this tiny little lock, and she said, "Billy, how is this going to keep anybody out? I mean, this glass is just you're right through it. How is this going to keep people out of here? How do you feel safe behind this?" And I said, "Honey, the glass is not here to keep people out. The glass is there to wake me up. It's the gun that keeps people out." And she just, light bulb went off in her head, which means she's far, far, far smarter. Not that I didn't know this in advance, but she's far, 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 far smarter than people who've lived here for 40 years who still can't figure that out. Still can't figure it out. The house can have, and by the way, everybody, and Natasha as well, for most of the history of this country, you didn't even need the deadbolt. Most people, for most of the time in America, up until the 60s when liberals started to take over, most people didn't lock their cars and they didn't lock their houses. They just didn't. you would park at the supermarket and you'd leave your keys in the car. And you'd walk in, get your stuff, and you'd come back. You'd go home, you'd close the door. What do you need to lock the door for? It wasn't that people were lazy, it just never occurred to them to have to lock the door. This was what most of America was like. And the reason it was like that was because pretty much everybody understood that if you go through somebody's door in the middle of the night without asking permission, you're likely to encounter something you're not going to want to see. And if you get, and if it turns out you don't get shot, but you get caught, you're going to be punished. And if you hurt somebody, you'll be killed. You'll be executed. You'll hang, or you get the electric chair or something. It's amazing how that works, really, when you get right down to it. And people lived in a situation that's so free of fear compared to today. So I would say those are the main things. Stephen, we'll do one more. Yeah.